Hello, Science 30 class. This is part 2 of our Chapter 1 notes in our Unit A Biology unit. Now we're going to be talking about blood and all the important things that are moving through our blood and what does the blood actually do. So hopefully we've reviewed all the anatomy of the heart and how the heart actually works to move blood around. Now we're going to take a deeper look into what blood actually is made up of and what functions does it serve. Here we see the composition of blood. We have our picture and you can see kind of the three things that blood is made up of. However, there's actually four things in blood and the four major things we're going to study in blood, except two of them are very, very small percentages. The two big things are plasma and red blood cells. Let's say they make up like 98 to 99% of what your blood is. And you can see they're almost split, a little bit more plasma than red blood cells. That less than 1% is white blood cells, and again, less than 1% is also going to be platelets. And so, as you see in the brackets, we have the actual medical names or the actual terminology rather than just calling it red blood cells. You will also see erythrocytes pop up, and white blood cells are actually called leukocytes. And then we'll have platelets. I doubt you'll see it, but they're called thrombocytes as well. But for our purposes, we'll just call them platelets. And for the most part, it will be red blood cells, white blood cells, and plasma to make up blood. So if you've ever given blood, or maybe you've had some other biology, what exactly is blood plasma? Well, it's straw colored, so it's kind of yellowy. It's that really dull yellow, and it's made up of a lot of water. It's 55% of our blood, but they are crucial in carrying things. And so they have proteins that carry antibodies and they carry nutrients and they'll help keep electrolyte balances. And it's the main transportation of, okay, things will get dissolved in there because it's mostly water. And so it's very, very important stuff that helps our body function. And that's the role of plasma. So here we have red blood cells, or shortened to RBCs. So remember, they're called erythrocytes, and they are just red blood cells. The details of how much they make up is about 45%. Remember, the red blood cells, their main function is going to be for this gas exchange, and they're going to carry this O2 and CO2. So they drop off the oxygen and they collect the CO2 to be deposited as waste. The other important part about red blood cells is they contain this hemoglobin, which aids and allows this gas exchange to occur. As you can see from this picture, we see this typical shape of red blood cells. This is what they call a biconcave, and so it has kind of that concave shape to it on both sides of it. This allows it to pass through these tiny, tiny little vessels, which is very important because remember, blood has to go through those capillaries that are only almost a cell thick, right? So they need to kind of squish together. That biconcave allows them to squeeze through them. And then this also allows to have a greater surface area to increase gas exchange. Moving on to WBCs, or white blood cells, or leukocytes, as we'll call them as well, and we need to be familiar with that term. These are actually larger than red blood cells, and the other interesting part is they actually keep their nucleus when they mature and when our bone marrow makes new blood cells. And so red blood cells will lose their nucleus, and we see that biconcave shape. White blood cells will keep their nucleus inside and have it, and kind of makes sense, that's why they're bigger. But they're also a lot less frequent in our blood, so less than 1% of our blood. This is interesting because if you're ever fighting off an infection, your body will make more and more. And so having a high white blood cell count can give an indicator that maybe your body is actually fighting off an infection. And so that's something doctors will actually look at is what is your white blood cell count and how many are there in your blood? Because we should know how much there should be, but if it's higher than normal, maybe there's something wrong. Because your primary function of these white blood cells, as we see in this picture, as they're popping up, They're to seek out invading microbes and they're to fight off infections. And we'll have a lot more details on how do our white blood cells and how does our blood fight off infections and bacteria. Here we have platelets and their primary function. Their primary function is they're to help blood clot and to help heal. So if we ever get a scrape or a cut, it will bleed, but this platelets in our blood realizes that there's been a cut or a break in the cells, and they release a special protein that will actually bind and help the blood to clot up. And this way, we don't just keep bleeding, but we can actually heal, and that's what will help form these scabs. And so you can see from this graphic is how platelets will actually work, and it'll go through a series of changes and how it will kind of detect that it's not just smooth, something's been ruptured, and it will sense that, okay, it has this rough edge, it needs to go through this sort of a reaction, and you can see it'll go through from prothrombin, thrombin, fibrogen to fibrin, and that fibrin is kind of what we see as what would be our scabs or the stuff that helps clot up and kind of seal a wound. Some big cuts, obviously there's not enough platelets to actually seal up very, very large wounds and we would just bleed. Small cuts and scrapes, our body can actually heal. So that's why sometimes we need to stitch things together if it's really deep and we need to help our skin actually close that gap. Also, this is where we got the name thrombocytes from because of these certain proteins that they're releasing. Before we jump into a more in-depth look into our immunity, I wanted to touch base and talk about cardiovascular diseases and disorders. And so cardiovascular is exactly what it is broken up into. Cardio is heart, vascular is all of our veins and arteries and our vessels that carry blood. And so depending where the disease or the disorder happens, is it a heart disease or is it a blood vessel disease? And you can see the list below is just a few of the different things and where is the issue actually happening. And so something like a stroke, this is a blood vessel disease because there's a clot in the brain. However, if there is a clot in the heart and the coronary artery gets cut off, you have a heart attack. So different diseases and different terms, but it's down to the same issues of maybe having a blood clot somewhere. When you go through and study this, please take time to just review some of these terms and understand some of the basics of these cardiovascular diseases. I talked about cardiovascular diseases, and one of the big ones was having blood clots, and depending where they are. So what causes this? And what causes this buildup, and what causes a blood clot? Well, you can see that there is plaque on the arteries there. And this plaque is just, you can almost think of it like the plaque that's on your teeth, if you will. It builds up over time, and unless you get something to clean it out or have something to carry it away, it just keeps building up and up and up. The issue becomes when our platelets start to see this plaque and it starts to get cracked and there's openings in this plaque and the platelets think it's something to close up. And so they release their fibrin and then the blood starts to get trapped until finally there's so much plaque, there's so much fibrin, all this blood actually starts to form a clot inside your vessel. This comes down to these two different lipoproteins. We have low density lipoproteins and high density lipoproteins. Essentially, LDL is the bad cholesterol, HDL is the good one. HDL carries it away from the body to the liver to get processed. The low density lipoprotein, though, is the one that carries it from the liver to the rest of the body. We do need cholesterol. However, with our diets and eating lots and lots of fatty foods, we have too much cholesterol. So we do need some, and we need some vitamins to be dissolved in the cholesterol so our body can absorb it. So we do need some, but we don't need as much as we get. So other things that affect blood vessels, like aside from diet and having these cardiovascular diseases, something called sickle cell anemia, and that actually affects the hemoglobin molecule, and it affects the protein within red blood cells, and different issues will pop up with that, and it affects the absorption of the hemoglobin and how it absorbs oxygen. And I wanted to show the picture at the bottom with cardiovascular diseases and other things like that as well is a valve. And we have to understand how this valve actually works, because I've seen it on lots of diplomas and diploma questions of where do you place and how do you place this valve? And you have to understand, how do you flow through the heart? And you see as it goes in the direction below right here, and we can see blood flowing this way and going this direction, it will flow up, push the ball, and the blood can actually go around. And this allows the valve to open one way. However, once the heart contracts, if blood was to go back because it wants to flow, it pushes the ball back and the ball actually closes the valve and it's not able to work, and it prevents the backflow of blood. So this is a key one if we're writing our diploma. Want to pay special attention to these valves and where would you place them and what direction do they need to be placed to work. So other issues that can pop up with our blood. We just finished talking about some cardiovascular diseases, and now we're going to move into our immunity and our immune response. But to bridge that, we're talking about blood typing and why is it important to understand what a blood type is. So during a blood transfusion, there's a process called agglutination that occurs if the wrong type of blood is given to a person. This means the blood will clump together. The agglutinated red blood cells can clog the blood vessels and stop the circulation of blood to various parts of the body. It's essentially saying this blood is not supposed to be here. It doesn't have the right markers on it, and we'll talk more about that, but they start to crack and they start to attack each other, and then this hemoglobin starts getting released into the actual bloodstream, not just being contained in the red blood cells, and this becomes very toxic when it's outside the red blood cells. With blood typing, we have 4 different types of blood types, and we've probably heard of them before. They're A, B, AB, and O. And the differences between them are the antigens and the antibodies that interact with blood types. And we're going to start bridging into what are antigens and antibodies and why does our blood actually have them. So as we're learning about blood typing, we're going to learn about things that involve our immune response. And so first things first is an antibody. And this is a protein that's found on the blood or on other bodily fluids or on bacteria or it can be on viruses. It's any kind of foreign body. There's small little identifiers and there's these proteins that help identify it at the cellular level. Antigens are the triggers for the production of these antibodies that bind to the antigen markers. And they're a protein that are located on the surface of the cell. And so with these blood types, depending on what antigens the blood types have, whether it's an A or B antigen, your body will determine, is it safe to be here or do I need to attack it and is it an invader? Here's a quick little chart that you can kind of see how it all works together. Because like I said, there's an A type of antigen and a B type of antigen. And you can have A, perfect, straightforward. There's this A type of blood and there's this B type of blood. However, as people started to discover more and more about blood typing, they started to realize that, oh, sometimes there's an AB type blood and they can accept blood from both types A and B. However, sometimes there was a blood where it can't accept anything. And this was the issue is through trial and error and people figuring out what kind of blood type they have, it's like, wait, why does this person accept blood from anyone, where this person cannot accept blood from anyone. And that was called O, or like zero antigens markers. And that's where we get it from. So we have AB types, we have an AB blood type, and we have an O to blood type. And it depends who they can give blood to or who they can receive blood from. There is more details to it, and there's also called this rhesus factor, and this was based off of studies with rhesus monkeys. And there's also positives and negatives to go along with it, and this is another level for blood typing. And so when people talk about being either positive or negative, they're really saying is whether the person's blood cells have the Rh factor as an extra antigen or they don't have it. And so as we're starting to learn more and more about the intricacies of what our human bodies are doing, we're starting to add levels to it. And so we already had the AB system set up, and then it was, oh wait, they have this extra marker or they don't. And so it was this plus minus factor as well. So I'm going to pause it here, finish the video for blood typing and all this stuff about blood, and I'll put out another video with immunity and starting to talk about all these defenses that our body will do. So stay tuned and thank you and take care.